Here on the Gower Peninsula in South Wales, there's a spectacular landscape of cliffs and caves. In 1823, in one of these caves, a skeleton was found, surrounded by beautiful artefacts of ivory and shell. It turned out to be a young man who died around 29,000 years ago. What's remarkable is that his burial can give us a glimpse of a world that existed before the height of the Ice Age. Just a few thousand years after his death, ice sheets would spread south across Britain. I've come to unravel the mystery of the lost world in which this man lived. I wanted to find out how the country would have looked here 29,000 years ago when the young man's body was buried in the cave.
It's easy to forget that all the surface landscape we see in the country, the seashore, grasslands, forests, all has developed over the last 10,000 years since the great ice sheet retreated. But before the ice advanced, there was another Britain where people lived in a landscape that has long since vanished, obliterated by the ice. So what was it like?
The first thing was to explore the cave where the young man was found, at Paviland as it's now called. But it's not easy to get into. Before the ice, 29,000 years ago, the sea would have been about 70 miles away from here. Since then, as the ice sheets melted, the sea has risen about 120 metres. When the young man was buried, this was probably a relatively easy climb up a ski slope. Now that's been washed away by the sea, and even getting here is an achievement.
Most astonishing place. For me, all caves have a mysterious atmosphere, a strange sculpturing of the wall, and this cave in particular, when I think that this is the exact place where the body of that young man laid for 29,000 years. And one reflects on the people who were with him, his companions. They brought his body in, laid him there, and left him. The view from here must have been amazing. 29,000 years ago, they could have surveyed a flat plain stretching for miles. And the cave, too, must have been visible from far away, a striking point of reference in the landscape. It must have been a significant sight for them. But what can this burial tell us about life back then? I need to go to Oxford, where the remains of the young man's body are now kept.
It was geologist William Buckland who first examined the bones back in 1823. He labelled them as female and was struck by their covering of red ochre, what he called ruddle. He brought them to Oxford, and there in the Natural History Museum, archaeologist Paul Pettit showed them to me.
So here she lies, the Red Lady of Paviland, Buckland called her.
The Red Lady himself, yes. Buckland did speculate that it was male, and in fact we now know definitely that the Red Lady was a young adult male.
And here's this ruddle that Buckland describes. It's very striking on these bones here, isn't it?
It's extremely striking on all of the bones of the lower body from the pelvis downwards.
It strikes me how must have been a pretty tall individual.
Yes, he was. We can estimate his stature from the size of his femur, his thigh bone, and he probably stood about 5'10" tall in life. So he was a tall, long-legged, long-armed member of our own species.
Very different from the short, stocky Neanderthals.
Yes, quite different.
The more heavily built Neanderthals are known to have survived until around this time. But although this man's skull and some other bones are gone, probably washed away by the sea, there's enough to confirm that the skeleton from Paviland belonged to someone quite different. He's the first known modern human in Britain. And the beautifully crafted flint spearheads found nearby tell us he was a hunter. But there was something else in the cave.
Buckland mentions that there was a mammoth skull at the head of the skeleton.
He does. We have the Red Lady in the nice central position here, and in very close proximity, this complete skull with tusk fragments attached to it as well.
So, all you're saying indicates that this must have been a very exceptional burial of an exceptional person.
Absolutely. And these are fragments of rods of mammoth ivory, which have been polished with red ochre. Perhaps magic wands.
A wand of mammoth ivory.
Yes, clearly magical items because they come from these tremendous, large, dangerous and probably quite rare animals. He's probably special in a spiritual sense, perhaps a medicine man, someone who could intercede with the spirit world and was important to his society because of that.
The sacred burial of a young man, one of the new breed of humans, different from the Neanderthals, and certainly very different from the Red Lady William Buckland had imagined. Down here on the beach at the Mumbles, you can still find what geologists think is the source of their ochre. If you take bits of this rock and grind it up with water or oil, you can get the kind of dye that they would have used for the burial. These people had strong beliefs and elaborate rituals. It looks like a complex and well-organized community. It's our first glimpse into that lost world before the ice. But what was life like for these people 29,000 years ago?
I wanted to start by finding out about the climate. I know that sometimes a record of climate changes going back long into the past can be preserved in caves. 3 miles from Paviland, where the remains of the young man were found, is Cat Hole Cave. There I met geographer Pete Smart from Bristol University, who invited me to join him on a hunt for stalagmites.
You can see the stalagmite at the top quite nicely here.
This curtain stuff, yes.
That's right. You see it's running down into the stalagmite,
yes,
overlying this other material underneath.
Yes.
Pete explained that stalagmites and stalactites only grow during warmer climate spells. I wanted to know why.
2 reasons. First of all, when the ground's frozen at the surface, you're not going to get any water coming down into the cave. And secondly, when it's cold, there's not enough biological activity and you just simply don't get the carbonic acid to dissolve the limestone and deposit the stalagmites.
More plants growing, yes.
That's absolutely it, yeah.
Because the growth of these cave formations depends on climate, they contain a climate record going back thousands of years. Pete's been examining samples from caves in the area.
First thing we do when we get these back is we cut them so we can see the internal structure.
Look at that.
And you can see in this one there are a whole series of different layers, and it's accumulated slowly through time.
So this is stop and start, is it really, these lines on here?
That's right. And they each reflect climate conditions. Climate was warm and then it cooled down. The stalagmite stopped growing, it switched back on again when conditions became warm and so forth.
Now, you can get some dating from this.
That's right. The key thing is that we can tell the ages when these changes in climate occurred because the sample has in it uranium. The uranium decays over time and we can get the age of these changes of climate from that.
So what do these measurements tell us about the climate 29,000 years ago when the young man was buried in Paviland?
What we know is there was no stalagmite deposition at that time in any of the Gower caves. The last phase of stalagmite deposition we've got is at about 35,000 years. And so what we're seeing is we're seeing a change from relatively warm conditions at 35,000 years ago through